what are some things you wished your team had practiced more to be better prepared now around communication and sharing information? And then now that you're in the situation you are, what would you do differently or change when we go back to buildings?
We had always talked about the importance of communication and maintaining timelines. But when people went rogue, we would just pull them in and go, hey, you're supposed to stick to the timeline. This is what we asked. But what we did now in this situation is we brought in our executive directors that work directly with the principals and campuses and had them illustrate to our teams what truly transpires when communication is not accurate or timely or provided in the right manner.
How do you determine what's the right timeline and what's the right manner to deliver these communications? Like, and even chunk size, like, how do you know that that's right?
And then like for at home learning, it was just, there was so much to process. It was just small nuggets of information, and we would prioritize that based on what would be most helpful to support families first.
Are you starting to see any kind of patterns as to how often you have to send out the same message for it to land?
It is definitely much more so now. For sure, I would say that, in the past, it probably took maybe 2 or 3 conversations for it to really stick, or 2 or 3 experiences for it to really stick. But what we're seeing now is because of the uncertainty of the times, the stress that this has caused, it's probably double that in
Oh,
terms
wow.
of, yeah, it's taking a lot longer.
I think one of the things that I've noticed, especially in this situation where there's so much information that's changing and being passed through, but people want, on one hand, people want transparency and that information. On the other hand, they're like overwhelmed when they
Yeah,
get it,
yes.
especially depending on your level. And so I think often in leadership positions, you're more used to having a lot of information that is incomplete. Um, and
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you wait necessarily or unnecessarily to provide that information. But when we're in a heavy sharing information mode, it does put an additional cognitive tax on people that usually don't have that information available to them on a regular basis. And I'm curious, like, have you seen any reaction to that from people where they're just like, it's just too much information, or are most people saying, look, it's a lot, but I'd rather have the information than not?
I would say it's a mixed bag. Um, I've got some team members that they're like, Amy, you've got to chunk this information and let me process it first. But then I've got some teams that they're like, I want the plan from start to finish. I want all of the details, and then they don't like it when you have to deviate because now you've got a new piece to the puzzle that you didn't have before. Those that want that plan up front, when you have to pivot and make that change, they don't like it because they're jumping in and trying to do all of it at once. And then when you come back and you say, oh, TEA just released this, we're going to have to make this adjustment. They're like, but you said, and I've already done all of this.
Actually, I've been reading this book called Leadership as Language,
Mm-hmm.
and he talks about red work versus blue work. And red work is, a lot of the technical, like assembly line-ish, mindless, repetitive actions, and we try to we encourage efficiency in those models, whereas blue work is like the strategy and the big picture thinking, but also making sure that kind of people are on board and doing that kind of stuff. And in some ways, what we try to do in school systems, even though we want people to think for themselves and be autonomous and all of that, we often treat people in a way that it's like, we want you to do it this way, and we want consistency across each person. And so
Right.
how do we shift that with the information that we share?
That's a really great question. Yeah, because I've got a handful that live at home by themselves. And so they've become into workaholics, and they're just constantly like, you have got to take a break and find some balance. You got to cut it off at some point. But yeah, it's been a fascinating journey watching that transition, and then trying to get back into, we've got to balance what we were doing, because that work's got to continue, and we've got to balance this at-home learning piece. What's bad is when an entire team wants to do the red work and nobody wants to do the blue work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because then you don't have the thinkers and the visionary folks. It's just the day-to-day grind and status quo.
I found that operating off of 2-week sprints really effective for them, because everybody could have short doses of all of their work styles. For every sprint, there's the big picture, there's a purpose, there's, where are we going? You say we're only going to target that for 2 weeks, and then you got the people that just need to know everything. And so, you can generally know what needs to be done in 2 weeks. You get the people that want to reflect on everything. And so after the sprint, you reflect on what went well and what didn't. And then you start a new sprint. We get people to work in red and blue simultaneously.
So what is that? So like when you're working on a 2-week project, what does that kind of look like from start to finish? A variety of things, or
that's the question. What should we talk about?
It's communication. The importance of communication.
The importance of communication in like a remote work environment.
Yes, and following, and I'm not saying that's what we have to talk about. That's just what's really top of mind for me right now.